What would you do if someone from your past, someone you cared about deeply, suddenly found their way back into the public conversation? Not physically, not romantically, but through a single comment, a moment, a slip of the tongue. A moment so small it could have easily been ignored, yet somehow it grew, twisted, and expanded until it became a headline the entire world couldn't stop talking about. And what would you do if that headline involved not just you, but your current life, your family, and your peace? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. That's exactly the situation Prince Harry is said to have found himself in. One offhand remark, a hint, some say accidental, others say revealing, that made people wonder if he still held feelings for someone he used to be close to. Chelsy Davy, the girl from his younger years. The girl who knew him before palace rules, worldwide scrutiny, and the pressures of adulthood shaped him into the person we know today. But here's where the story gets complicated. Chelsy is now married to Sam Cutmore-Scott, a successful hotelier known for his calm demeanor, private life, and protective nature. He stays out of tabloids. He avoids chaos. He has built a reputation for being grounded, thoughtful, and steady. So when rumors began circulating that Prince Harry had said something that sounded like he still cared about Chelsy, even if he didn't mean it romantically, it was enough to make the internet go into overdrive. Comment sections exploded. Headlines multiplied. Analysts dug into archives. Fans went back to old interviews looking for clues. And quietly, behind the scenes, Sam Cutmore-Scott began hearing his name being thrown into a story he never asked to be part of. That's where our story begins. But to understand why this moment matters, we need to travel backward, not to gossip, not to drama, but to context. And context is everything in a story where emotions, memories, and misunderstandings mix together until you can't separate what was meant from what was perceived. The truth is simple. When people grow up under intense pressure, like Harry did, the relationships they form before the world starts watching often leave the deepest impressions. Chelsy knew Harry before he became the Prince of Controversy, before global interviews, before best-selling books, before the storm. They were young. They were figuring themselves out. And like all young relationships, theirs was shaped by moments of joy, confusion, hope, and uncertainty. Years passed. They moved on. They grew up. They built new lives. But memories? Memories have a funny way of resurfacing when no one expects them to. So when Harry made a comment recently that hinted at thinking back on old times, people jumped to conclusions. Not because he said something dramatic, but because people love the idea of revisiting the past. It's human. It's relatable. And when the person involved is royalty, the ripple effect becomes a tidal wave. But let's pause here, because this is where things start to shift, not toward romance or drama, but toward something much more real. Boundaries, respect, and the importance of communication in the modern world. According to reports, and we're sticking strictly to public conversation, nothing private, Sam Cutmore-Scott became aware of the situation not because he was looking for trouble, but because people kept tagging, messaging, and bringing his name into the discussion. He saw headlines that twisted innocent comments into bold claims. He saw how social media spun harmless nostalgia into speculation. And he saw his wife mentioned constantly alongside a prince she had dated many years ago. Imagine being in his position. Imagine being someone who values privacy, stability, and calm, suddenly being pulled into a story you didn't ask for, a story about a chapter long closed. And so, according to circulating rumors, Sam took a step. Not dramatic, not aggressive, not confrontational, just firm, assertive, and clear. A message reminding Harry to be mindful, respectful, and cautious about how his words could be interpreted by millions of people. From the outside, it might seem unusual that a private citizen would ever speak directly to a prince. But when a rumor becomes loud enough, when the internet starts weaving stories, when the past gets mixed with the present, someone has to set the record straight. That's exactly what Sam did. But here's where things get interesting. Harry, who has been under enormous emotional and public pressure in recent years, reportedly didn't take the message lightly. Not because he wanted trouble, but because sometimes even well-intentioned conversations can sting, especially when the world is watching, especially when everything you say gets twisted. especially when you feel people are misunderstanding your intentions. And so the tension began. Not the fiery, dramatic kind we see in movies. Not yelling, not confrontation, not anything inappropriate. This was quieter, subtle, emotional. The kind of tension that builds when two people come from completely different worlds and yet find themselves pulled into the same narrative. But why did this story catch fire? Why did so many people latch onto it? Because it taps into something universal. Past relationships versus present responsibilities. Old memories versus new commitments. Private lives versus public speculation. Almost everyone has someone from their past, a friend, a crush, a memory, who resurfaces unexpectedly. It doesn't mean anything romantic. It doesn't mean anything inappropriate. But when it happens, it can stir emotions you haven't thought about in years. Now imagine that happening to someone with millions of eyes watching. Every word Harry speaks becomes a headline. Every moment gets dissected. Every slip becomes a story. And once the internet decides something is dramatic, there's no turning back. But here's the real twist, the part nobody expected and the reason this story matters. This moment didn't just involve Harry's past. It didn't just involve Chelsy and Sam. It tapped into Harry's ongoing struggle between the world he left behind and the world he's trying to build. The emotional tug-of-war between who he was as a teen and who he is as an adult. And the way nostalgia, pressure, and public scrutiny can blend into something confusing. And if that weren't enough, the situation grew even more complicated as people online started speculating. Did Harry really still care? Was it all blown out of proportion? Was Sam overreacting? Was the media stirring the pot? Was the whole thing just a misunderstanding? Every side had a different narrative. And while all this was unfolding, one person remained quiet. Chelsy Davy herself. A woman who has consistently avoided drama, publicity, and unnecessary attention for years. A woman who built a peaceful, private life far away from royal noise. Her silence only made the story grow bigger. Because when someone stays silent, people fill the gaps with imagination. But here's the part of the story that most people overlook, and the part that truly sparked tension. Harry didn't just hint at nostalgia. The story didn't just involve an old relationship. And Sam didn't just react as a husband. This moment became a symbol of something larger. The complicated way the past can clash with the present. When the media picked up the story, Harry reportedly became frustrated. Not because of Sam, not because of Chelsy, but because it felt like he was losing control of the narrative again. He spent years trying to take control of his own voice. He's worked hard to distance himself from royal expectations. But one comment, one misinterpretation, one rumor, and suddenly he was back in a story he never intended to re-enter. From Sam's perspective, it was simple. Protect his wife, set boundaries, and shut down speculation before it escalated. From Harry's perspective, it was overwhelming. Another public misunderstanding, another storm, another emotional weight he wasn't prepared for. Two different worlds, two different intentions, one accidental collision. So as the rumors spread, as fans divided, as commentators analyzed every detail, a new question emerged, a question at the heart of this entire video. Was this simply a misunderstanding amplified by the internet? Or was something deeper going on? Because behind every rumor is a truth waiting to be uncovered. Behind every awkward moment is a turning point. And behind every unexpected tension is a story that reveals something about the people involved. In Harry's case, this moment revealed something important about how he handles pressure, nostalgia, and emotional triggers. In Sam's case, it showed how far he will go to protect his peace. And in Chelsy's case, it highlighted how firmly she has moved on with her life. But the real explosion, the spark that turned a small misunderstanding into a full-blown headline, didn't come from Harry's comment. It came from what happened next, a response that nobody expected. A moment that changed the tone of the entire situation. Because Sam Cutmore-Scott didn't just send a message. He sent a warning, a calm one, a respectful one, but a serious one. And that warning became the turning point of everything that followed. Because after Sam spoke, the story didn't quiet down. It escalated. What if your first crush, the one you never forgot, suddenly became part of a story you couldn't ignore? Not because they reached out, not because there was unfinished business, but because your past somehow keeps knocking on the door of your present. For Prince Harry, that person was Chelsy Davy. Chelsy wasn't just another name in Harry's past. She represented a time before public scrutiny, before cameras, before the world watching his every move. A time when he could be just Harry, carefree, uncertain, and discovering what it meant to fall in love. Their relationship was filled with highs, lows, and all the unpredictability of being young in a world that didn't yet know them. They were deeply connected, yes, but also constantly tested by the demands of a royal life. The thing about first loves is that they linger. They shape how you see the world. They remind you of the person you once were. And for Harry, Chelsy was that living memory, someone who knew him before the pressures, before the mistakes, before the headlines. Their relationship had its public moments. Paparazzi snapshots, rumors in tabloid papers, a prince sneaking through hidden entrances to see the girl he cared about. But the public never really saw the intimate side, the late-night phone calls, the heartfelt confessions, the moments of laughter and vulnerability. It was a relationship wrapped in secrecy and, at times, misinterpretation. They were both learning, both growing, both figuring out who they wanted to be. When Harry and Chelsy were together, the world expected perfection. Royal protocol often collided with teenage passion. Every decision, every word, every appearance was scrutinized. Yet despite all that pressure, their bond was real. They laughed together, supported each other, and shared moments of ordinary life that most people would never see. Trips to quiet places, private dinners, and long conversations about the future. They were teenagers trying to navigate adulthood, but with the weight of public expectation pressing down on them. Yet, as with many young relationships, timing became an obstacle. Chelsy had her ambitions. Harry had his obligations. Royal duties, global attention, and personal challenges slowly created distance between them. And eventually, their romantic chapter ended. Publicly, quietly, or somewhere in between, depending on who told the story. The official narrative was that they had grown apart. The unofficial narrative, the one friends whispered about in confidence, suggested that their connection never fully faded. Over the years, Harry often spoke about past relationships in subtle ways. A mention in an interview here, a throwback anecdote there. But Chelsy's name rarely appeared. She had moved on, he had moved on, and life continued. Yet for those who knew him best, there was always the sense that Chelsy had left a permanent mark on his heart, a reminder of what could have been, a reflection of youthful love in its purest form. Chelsy, too, moved forward. She pursued her career, built a private life, and eventually married Sam Cutmore-Scott. Her life became one of stability and privacy, the kind of calm that Harry, at the time, could not yet achieve. She was content, grounded, and distant from the chaos that surrounded royalty. In many ways, Chelsy represented everything that Harry had once wanted, and in some ways, everything he had lost. But here's the fascinating part about the past. It doesn't always stay buried. Memories, feelings, and unresolved emotions have a habit of resurfacing. And when they do, they often appear at the most unexpected times. For Harry, that resurfacing happened recently, in a comment he made that hinted at nostalgia, reflection, and perhaps a lingering affection for what once was. The public didn't notice immediately, but those close to the story did, and that's when the ripple effect began. It's easy to assume that this kind of nostalgia is harmless. After all, who hasn't remembered an old friend or first crush? But when you are someone in Harry's position, with every word magnified and every gesture dissected, even a simple reflection can become a source of tension. And for Sam Cutmore-Scott, a man protective of his wife's privacy, this reflection was impossible to ignore. He saw the potential for misunderstanding. He saw the chance for stories, rumors, and speculation. And he knew, quietly, calmly, but firmly, that he had to act. Before that moment, Harry's nostalgia was private. A thought, a fleeting feeling, a memory tucked away in his mind. But memories, as we all know, have power when shared, even indirectly. They remind us of who we were, what we valued, and sometimes, what we still secretly wish for. In Harry's case, it reminded him of a simpler time, a life less complicated, and a love that had shaped him. Chelsy, meanwhile, was largely unaware of the immediate emotional storm. She had built boundaries around her life, ensuring that her past relationships stayed in the past. Her marriage to Sam Cutmore Scott was a clear line in her personal story, one she had every reason to protect. Yet, even the most careful boundaries can be challenged when someone from your past inadvertently steps back into the narrative. And so, the stage was set for a story that had all the elements of intrigue. A prince revisiting memories, a woman who had moved on, a protective spouse, and the ever-watchful public. Each element alone might seem simple, but together they created a tension that could not be ignored. It was the collision of past and present, of memory and reality, of emotion and reason. At the heart of this story is a universal question. What do we do when our past comes calling? When memories, old relationships, or unfinished chapters resurface unexpectedly? For Harry, the question became more complicated because the world was watching. For Chelsy, the question became more about maintaining her peace and protecting her marriage. For Sam, it was about setting boundaries and ensuring that a story didn't spiral beyond control. Yet, despite all this, there was an undercurrent of emotional truth. Harry's feelings, while nostalgic, were human. Chelsy's response, calm and measured, was understandable. Sam's intervention, protective and decisive, was justified. And the public, hungry for a story, filled in the blanks with speculation, exaggeration, and opinion. This combination created a perfect storm, a story that was part memory, part misunderstanding, and part very real emotional tension. And as every storm eventually does, it demanded a resolution. Who would act? Who would speak? Who would maintain calm? And who would react? But the first spark of action came quietly, almost invisibly. Sam Cutmore Scott, aware of the situation, took the step that would change the dynamic entirely. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't confrontational. It was firm, careful, and deliberate. A message, a conversation, a warning, whatever you choose to call it, that told Harry, clearly, that the past must not disrupt the present. And that, ultimately, is where the story truly begins. Not with anger, not with scandal, not with the media frenzy that would inevitably follow, but with the collision of past memories, present responsibilities, and the delicate balance that exists when private lives brush against public curiosity. Harry's connection to Chelsy Davy is a reminder that some first loves never truly leave us, that the experiences of youth can leave impressions that shape our emotional lives for decades, and that even as we grow, change, and build new paths, the echoes of those relationships can sometimes return, quietly, subtly, yet powerfully. The question now is simple. What happens when those echoes meet reality? When nostalgia collides with boundaries? When memories touch lives that have moved on? And most importantly, how does someone like Harry, a prince in the public eye, living under constant scrutiny, respond when a simple reflection becomes part of a story that everyone wants to analyze, debate, and sensationalize? Who protects the past when it threatens to collide with the present? For Chelsy Davy, that person became Sam Cutmore Scott, her husband, and the anchor in her life that she had carefully built after the whirlwind of her younger years. Sam isn't just a businessman or a hotelier with a global reputation. He is someone who values calm, privacy, and stability. And for Chelsy, after years under the spotlight alongside Harry, that stability was everything. Chelsy and Sam's relationship has always been quieter than her previous romance. Unlike the headlines and constant speculation that accompanied Harry, Sam and Chelsy have built their life deliberately, in a way that prioritizes peace and discretion. Their wedding, their outings, and even their social media presence are carefully curated to maintain boundaries. This deliberate approach is exactly what makes Sam the kind of husband who can intervene when a story from the past threatens their harmony. But let's step back for a moment. Who is Sam Cutmore Scott? To the world, he is a hotelier, successful, thoughtful, and quietly influential. He has worked hard to establish his own identity, not as a figure of public fascination, but as someone who commands respect in the business world. People who know him describe him as precise, reliable, and emotionally intelligent. And when Chelsy chose to marry him, she chose a life that reflected her own growth, mature, measured, and protected from the chaos of public scrutiny. When Harry's nostalgic comment resurfaced, it wasn't just words drifting in the wind. For Sam, it was a signal. a sign that the past might be creeping too close to the carefully constructed life he shared with Chelsy. Imagine seeing your partner's history with a former love suddenly become the center of global attention, and realizing that your private life could become the next headline. That's what Sam was faced with. Chelsy, for her part, reacted with composure. She is someone who has always handled attention with grace. After her relationship with Harry ended, she didn't chase headlines. She didn't comment publicly. She maintained her privacy and focused on building a life on her own terms. But even the most private life can be tested when someone from your past inadvertently casts a shadow over your present. Sam's response was calm but firm. He reached out in a way that was measured, not aggressive. His goal was simple: protect Chelsy, establish boundaries, and prevent a story from escalating beyond control. This wasn't about confrontation. It was about ensuring that the past stayed where it belonged, in memory, not in public speculation. What makes Sam's approach fascinating is how it reflects his understanding of both people involved. He knows Harry is under enormous public pressure. He understands the complexities of the past, and he recognizes the subtle ways nostalgia can influence behavior. Yet, despite this understanding, he didn't hesitate to act. He prioritized the present over the past, and peace over drama. The marriage between Chelsy and Sam also highlights an essential dynamic: the power of partnership. Chelsy's choice to marry Sam was about more than love. It was about aligning values, establishing mutual respect, and creating a life that could withstand external pressure. And when the echoes of her past threatened that equilibrium, Sam stepped in to reinforce it. But the situation wasn't just about private boundaries. There's another layer: the human element of emotion. Chelsy, though calm on the surface, experienced her own mix of feelings. She wasn't angry at Harry. She wasn't bitter. She was thoughtful, measured, and protective of the life she had built. At the same time, she understood the broader implications of the story: that public perception could spiral, that media speculation could distort reality, and that her peaceful life could suddenly be disrupted. The subtle complexity of this scenario is what makes it so compelling. On one side, there is Harry, nostalgic, reflective, and under scrutiny. On the other side, there is Chelsy, grounded, private, and forward-looking. And then there is Sam, the steady, protective presence who bridges the gap and ensures that the story doesn't escalate beyond control. It's a delicate balance, and one that requires both emotional intelligence and decisive action. Sam's intervention demonstrates how a strong, thoughtful partner can act as a buffer between past and present. His goal was not to shame, attack, or escalate, but to clarify and protect. He issued a warning that communicated boundaries without creating unnecessary drama. And yet, even with all the careful planning, the story didn't disappear. It grew, slowly, subtly, and through the channels of public speculation. For Harry, this development was unexpected. He likely never anticipated that a simple nostalgic reflection could trigger such a response. The contrast between his world and Sam's world became more evident. Harry, used to headlines, statements, and public analysis, suddenly encountered a person who valued calm, private solutions over public commentary. The clash wasn't about emotion alone. It was about perspective, values, and priorities. Meanwhile, Chelsy observed silently, a stabilizing force in this unfolding situation. She had learned over the years that discretion is often more powerful than commentary. Her ability to remain poised and calm under pressure was a testament to her growth and resilience. And it also meant that, despite the tension surrounding Harry's comment, she could continue living her life without letting the past dominate the present. It's important to note that this chapter in the story isn't about villainizing anyone. It's about understanding human reactions. Harry's comment, while innocent in intent, had consequences. Sam's response, while firm, was protective. Chelsy's reaction, while quiet, was grounded. Each person acted according to their values, their experiences, and the context they were navigating. And that interplay of personalities, priorities, and emotions is what makes the story so engaging. By stepping into the situation, Sam Cutmore-Scott demonstrated how boundaries can be set thoughtfully and decisively. He reminded Harry, gently but firmly, that some parts of the past should remain private, and that speculation, even unintentional, can have ripple effects. In doing so, Sam reinforced the importance of mutual respect, discretion, and protection of the people you care about most. And yet, despite his careful approach, the story was far from over. Because the public nature of Harry's life means that even private interventions can become fodder for speculation. Even a calm, measured warning can be interpreted in countless ways. And even when everyone involved acts with the best intentions, the narrative can quickly take on a life of its own. The next chapter of this story will reveal just how much influence Sam's intervention had, and how Harry reacted, quietly, emotionally, and in ways that would surprise many who thought they understood the situation. But for now, it's clear, Chelsy's marriage to Sam Cutmore-Scott isn't just a background detail. It's the central element that defines how the past interacts with the present, and how boundaries, respect, and partnership can shape the trajectory of a potentially volatile situation. And as this story continues to unfold, the question remains, how far would Harry go before realizing that the past cannot simply reclaim the present? How would Chelsy maintain her peace? And how would Sam continue to navigate a delicate balance between protecting his family and managing an unexpected collision with royal nostalgia? Imagine saying just one thing and having it spiral into a story the world can't stop talking about. One line, one hint, one reflection from the past that suddenly becomes a headline. That was the moment Prince Harry reportedly made a comment, innocent in intent, yet loaded with emotional weight, that would ignite an entire chain of events. It wasn't a public declaration. It wasn't a confession. It was more subtle, a comment in an interview, a throwaway remark during a conversation, a fleeting memory voiced aloud. But because Harry's every word is dissected under a global microscope, what might have been a small personal reflection turned into speculation, gossip, and ultimately tension between the past and the present. The comment, according to sources, hinted at nostalgia. Harry recalled a moment from his youth, a memory that involved Chelsy Davy, the first love who had left a mark on his heart. He didn't say he wanted to reconnect. He didn't imply any romantic desire. He merely reflected on a meaningful period in his life, a time before the spotlight, before global attention, before the complicated pressures of adulthood shaped him. Yet, as with many things involving public figures, intention rarely matters. Interpretation does. People immediately read into his words. Social media reacted. Tabloids speculated. Commentary exploded online. And suddenly, a quiet, private reflection had become a public story. Headlines framed it as Harry hints he still has feelings for Chelsy, while fans debated whether nostalgia equaled romance. For Sam Cutmore-Scott, Chelsy's husband, this wasn't hypothetical. It wasn't some distant commentary he could ignore. He saw the ripple effect and recognized the potential impact on his wife, their life, and their peace. Sam isn't someone who thrives on drama. He is measured, private, and calculated. But when a situation threatens someone you care about, silence can be dangerous. And so, he began paying attention. Chelsy, meanwhile, noticed the media attention only gradually. She has spent years learning how to protect her peace. Public speculation rarely touches her directly, and she understands that people often overreact to small comments. Yet, even she couldn't fully escape the subtle intrusion of the past reappearing. The comment, innocent as it was, had the power to shift public perception. And perception, in today's world, often drives reality. Now, consider Harry's perspective. He made the comment without expecting this level of scrutiny. Perhaps he was nostalgic. Perhaps he was reflective. Perhaps he simply wanted to honor a memory. But once the words were out there, he couldn't control how others would interpret them. And when interpretation mixes with social media, rumors, and global interest, even a small statement can feel like a storm bearing down. This is where the story really becomes compelling. Because it's not just about words. It's about timing, context, and perception. Harry's comment was technically harmless. But in the hands of the public and in the context of Chelsy's marriage, it became a spark. A spark that, when noticed by the right person, Sam Cutmore-Scott, became a signal to act. An act he did. Sam didn't jump to drama. He didn't confront. He didn't make a spectacle. He communicated quietly, firmly, and with purpose. The warning wasn't about aggression. It was about boundaries. It was about protecting the present from the subtle influence of the past. And for Harry, it was unexpected. The calm authority behind the intervention likely surprised him, because it wasn't the kind of reaction he had anticipated from someone outside the public eye. This comment also serves as a reminder of how powerful the past can be. Memories, old relationships, and unresolved emotional connections can resurface in ways that catch us off guard. And when those memories intersect with other people's lives, particularly people who have invested in stability, privacy, and commitment, even innocent reflections can have consequences. The public reaction added another layer to the tension. Fans dissected the wording, speculated about intent, and debated whether nostalgia could exist without romantic implications. Media outlets framed the comment as a potential rekindling of old emotions. And social media, as it always does, amplified every perspective, every opinion, and every interpretation. Suddenly, a private moment had taken on a life of its own. For Sam, the comment wasn't an abstract idea. It was a real-time warning sign. He recognized that even a minor hint of lingering affection could be misinterpreted, especially given Harry's global visibility. So, he stepped in, not as a critic, but as a guardian of his family's boundaries. The decision was deliberate. It was calculated. It was necessary. And it would ultimately set the tone for the unfolding story. From Harry's perspective, the comment, and the subsequent attention it received, might have felt frustrating. He was reflecting, reminiscing, and perhaps even exploring his own feelings of nostalgia. Yet he now faced public scrutiny he had not anticipated. What was meant as a personal reflection became a spark that ignited conversations far beyond his control. Chelsy's reaction, though quiet, was significant. She didn't respond publicly. She didn't escalate. She simply observed, maintained her boundaries, and allowed Sam to handle the situation. Her calmness is a reflection of the life she has built, thoughtful, private, and grounded. Even as the world speculated, she focused on what truly mattered: her family, her marriage, and her personal peace. This chapter of the story highlights a universal truth: words have power. Context matters. And even the smallest reflection, spoken without intent to harm, can create ripple effects when intersecting with relationships, history, and public attention. The comment that started it all was a catalyst. It revealed Harry's human tendency to look back, to remember, and to reflect. It revealed Sam's protective instincts and his commitment to maintaining boundaries. And it revealed Chelsy's continued strength and composure in the face of potential disruption. But as with every catalyst, the story was only beginning. One comment may spark attention, but the reactions that follow, the private messages, the interventions, the misunderstandings, are what shape the trajectory of a situation. And for Harry, Sam, and Chelsy, the next steps would test patience, communication, and emotional boundaries in ways none of them could have predicted. Because this isn't just a story about nostalgia. It's about the collision of past and present, and how even the smallest hint of history can create a cascade of reactions. Harry's reflection wasn't intended to provoke conflict, yet it triggered a sequence of events that would challenge relationships, boundaries, and the very notion of moving forward. And just when it seemed that the situation might remain contained, Sam Cutmore-Scott made a decisive move. A move that would shift the dynamics completely and force Harry to confront the reality of how his past actions, even reflective ones, can have consequences in the present. Have you ever said something small, only to have it blown out of proportion? Now imagine that multiplied millions of times over, across social media, news outlets, and fan forums. That's exactly what happened after Harry's comment about his past with Chelsy Davy. What should have remained a private reflection suddenly transformed into rumors that refused to die. Rumors that threatened to overshadow the calm life Chelsy and Sam Cutmore-Scott had worked so hard to build. The moment Harry's words hit the public sphere, speculation spread like wildfire. Fans debated whether nostalgia implied lingering feelings. Pundits analyzed every possible angle. Headlines screamed potential romance, rekindled emotions, and royal drama. And although Harry's comment was subtle, the interpretation became louder, bigger, and more sensational than anyone could have imagined. Social media played a huge role in this. Platforms designed for connection and expression became pressure cookers for misinformation. Every sentence, every nuance, and every nuance of tone was dissected and reposted, shared, and remixed. Tweets and posts transformed reflection into obsession. Hashtags trended. Commentary exploded in forums and comment sections. And in the midst of it all, Harry had no control, just as he's faced with countless stories about himself, each one amplifying his actions far beyond what he intended. Meanwhile, Chelsy stayed quiet. She didn't comment. She didn't respond publicly. But the rumors were unavoidable. Even with Sam protecting their private life, whispers circulated among fans, journalists, and onlookers. People speculated about how she felt, how Sam might react, and what this meant for everyone involved. And the constant chatter made the story feel larger than life. For Sam Cutmore-Scott, the rumors were a signal to act decisively. He had already set boundaries privately, but the persistence of public speculation made it clear that silence alone wouldn't prevent the story from escalating. Rumors, once started, have a tendency to gain momentum, and in this case, momentum meant attention that could disrupt the balance of Chelsy's life. It's fascinating how rumors function. They often begin as a small observation, a snippet of truth, or even a misinterpretation. And yet, once the public attaches emotion, speculation, and storytelling to them, they take on a life of their own. They evolve, twist, and spread, often far beyond their origin. That's exactly what happened here. Harry's innocent reflection became the seed of countless stories, stories that had nothing to do with his intent and everything to do with perception. Even the smallest detail was dissected. A photo from years ago resurfaced. A past interview was reanalyzed. Every interaction between Harry and Chelsy, no matter how innocent, was scrutinized. Some fans argued that Harry's comment proved lingering attachment. Others claimed the media was exaggerating. And still others questioned Sam's reaction, wondering if it was too strong, too protective, or even unnecessary. For Harry, the rumors must have felt frustrating. A moment of personal reflection had turned into a spectacle. His intention wasn't to provoke gossip, yet he now faced the consequences of interpretation, amplification, and misunderstanding. The very thing he had hoped to keep subtle had become a global talking point. For Chelsy, the rumors were another reminder of why she values privacy. She had learned, through experience, that public perception often overshadows reality. The calm, grounded life she had built with Sam could be disrupted by a single misinterpreted comment, proving just how fragile the balance between past and present can be. And for Sam, the rumors reinforced the need for vigilance. Protecting a loved one's privacy is never simple, especially when the narrative is already out of control. He had to carefully navigate the situation. Not react emotionally, not escalate publicly, but act in a way that would safeguard the life he and Chelsy had cultivated together. The rumors also revealed a deeper truth about modern life. In an age of constant connectivity, nothing remains private. Thoughts, reflections, and even subtle words can become global stories. And the people involved, no matter how careful or discreet, can find themselves at the center of speculation they never invited. Interestingly, these rumors weren't just random chatter. They became a measure of perception. Fans analyzed tone, body language, and context. They debated motive, intent, and emotion. They created elaborate narratives about the past, present, and possible future. In essence, the rumor mill became its own universe, detached from reality, but deeply affecting those at its center. Despite the persistent gossip, one thing remained clear. Chelsy and Sam's relationship was strong. They weathered the storm with composure, prioritizing privacy and mutual respect over public validation. And yet, the rumors refused to fade. They were persistent, invasive, and emotionally taxing, not because of what was true, but because of what people believed could be true. This chapter in the story highlights a universal challenge: the difficulty of controlling narratives in a hyper-connected world. Even the most private individuals can become subjects of speculation, misunderstanding, and rumor. And when history, nostalgia, and emotional connections intersect, even a quiet reflection can escalate beyond anyone's control. The persistence of these rumors forced a choice: continue ignoring them, risking escalation, or intervene to set boundaries and reclaim control over private life. Sam chose intervention. His decision wasn't just about authority or anger. It was about protection, clarity, and maintaining the integrity of the present. And this decision would have consequences. Because once boundaries are drawn, reactions must follow. How Harry responded, how the public perceived the interaction, and how Chelsy maintained her peace. Each step would shape the ongoing narrative. Rumors, once alive, are difficult to contain, and the longer they persist, the more complex the situation becomes. By the end of this chapter, it's clear. The rumors that wouldn't die weren't just idle chatter. They were a reflection of human fascination with the past, the difficulty of maintaining privacy in a connected world, and the emotional stakes involved when personal history collides with public perception. How do you protect someone you love when the past suddenly collides with the present? For Sam Cutmore-Scott, the answer wasn't to react with anger or public drama. It was to act decisively, thoughtfully, and calmly. And yet, even a calm warning carries weight, particularly when the person on the receiving end is a prince whose every word and action is amplified worldwide. It started quietly. Sam observed the ripple effects of Harry's comment and the ensuing rumors. He recognized the potential emotional strain on Chelsy, the subtle intrusion into their private life, and the possibility that what began as nostalgia could evolve into speculation with far-reaching consequences. Sam understood the stakes, protecting his marriage, maintaining Chelsy's peace, and setting a boundary with clarity and authority. Sam's approach was deliberate. He didn't issue a public statement. He didn't create a scene. Instead, he chose a direct but measured method of communication, a private conversation, the kind that carries authority without aggression. His goal wasn't to shame or reprimand. It was to establish limits, protect the present, and ensure that the past remained where it belonged, in memory. Think about that for a moment. How many times in life have you needed to assert a boundary, only to hesitate because you didn't want to upset someone? Sam didn't hesitate. He knew that boundaries aren't about punishment. They are about protection. He understood that in this delicate situation, subtlety and calm could be more powerful than confrontation. The warning, though private, sent a clear message. Past reflections, nostalgia, or lingering hints of old feelings must not intrude on Chelsy's present. Sam communicated this with confidence, authority, and respect. It was firm but not hostile, a line drawn in the sand, yet delivered in a way that recognized Harry's humanity. For Harry, the message was likely unexpected. He is used to the glare of media attention, the scrutiny of the public eye, and the constant pressure of expectations. But this wasn't media commentary. This wasn't a headline. This was personal, direct, and undeniable. Someone had intervened in a way that required him to pause, reflect, and consider the consequences of even seemingly innocent words. What makes Sam's intervention compelling is how he balanced firmness with composure. He didn't escalate. He didn't dramatize. He didn't create a spectacle. Instead, he communicated boundaries with clarity, leaving no ambiguity about the expectations. Respect the present, honor the past, but do not allow nostalgia to disrupt what has been built since. Chelsy, for her part, observed the situation quietly. She knew that Sam's approach reflected not just protection, but wisdom. She had learned over the years that calm, reasoned action often has more impact than emotional reaction. And in this case, Sam's measured warning allowed her to maintain her peace without becoming entangled in unnecessary conflict. The dynamics at play here are fascinating. You have Harry, whose reflective comment sparked speculation. You have the public, eager to interpret and amplify. You have Chelsy, composed and resilient. And you have Sam, the steady presence asserting boundaries with precision. Each person is acting according to their values, experiences, and priorities, and each action carries consequences. It's also a reminder of how complex relationships can be when history, memory, and human emotion intersect. Harry's nostalgia was natural, understandable, and human. Chelsy's calmness reflected maturity and growth. Sam's intervention, however, shows the power of protective action and the importance of establishing limits when boundaries are threatened. The warning, though subtle, had ripple effects. It immediately created a pause in the narrative. Public speculation continued, of course, but the private dynamic had shifted. Harry was now aware. in no uncertain terms, that his past reflections were not to disrupt someone else's present. The line had been drawn, and the rules were clear. This is where the tension becomes particularly dramatic. Because while Sam's warning was calm, firm, and respectful, it also signaled that the story wasn't over. There was potential for further emotional responses, public speculation, and private reflection. Boundaries, after all, often provoke thought, reaction, and, sometimes, resistance, even when they are delivered with care. The warning also reinforces an important lesson about relationships. The past can only remain where it belongs if boundaries are respected. Nostalgia is human. Memories are inevitable. But when reflections interfere with the lives of others, especially those we care about, action is required. Sam's intervention illustrates the delicate balance between empathy, assertiveness, and protection. For Harry, receiving the warning must have prompted reflection. It was a reminder that the past, while meaningful, cannot reclaim the present. That even nostalgic thoughts, if not handled carefully, have consequences. And that some lines, particularly when it comes to someone else's peace and happiness, are non-negotiable. Meanwhile, Chelsy continued her life quietly, anchored by Sam's support. She didn't respond publicly, didn't engage with speculation, and allowed the private resolution to guide the situation. Her calm, grounded approach demonstrates a powerful truth. Sometimes the most effective intervention is not public drama, but private clarity. And yet, despite the warning, the story was far from resolved. The ripple effects continued to spread across media outlets, social commentary, and fan speculation. The dynamics between Harry, Chelsy, and Sam had shifted, yes, but the world was watching, waiting, and analyzing every nuance. Even the most measured actions can have unintended consequences when scrutiny is global. What do you do when a private memory, spoken without intention, suddenly triggers a ripple of consequences? For Prince Harry, that moment became intensely personal. A private reflection transformed into scrutiny, rumors, and a warning from Sam Cutmore-Scott. And while the world saw headlines, commentary, and speculation, what really mattered was Harry's reaction behind the scenes. Harry's first response was likely shock. He hadn't anticipated that a single nostalgic comment about Chelsy Davy, a memory from his youth, could provoke attention, concern, and intervention. For someone whose life has always been lived under a public microscope, one might assume he's prepared for every angle. But this wasn't the media or paparazzi. This was private action, coming from someone protecting someone else's boundaries, and that hits differently. Imagine receiving a calm, firm warning from a man you barely know personally, who is nonetheless married to the woman who occupies a significant part of your emotional history. That warning carries authority and clarity, and it forces reflection. Harry, in this moment, had to step back and think carefully about his words, his intentions, and the implications of both. At first, there may have been defensiveness. After all, nostalgia is natural. Reflecting on the past doesn't automatically mean wanting to disrupt the present. But the subtle firmness in Sam's approach left no room for misunderstanding. This boundary was real, and it had to be respected. For Harry, the challenge became internal. How to reconcile memory, sentiment, and respect for current relationships. Behind closed doors, sources suggest Harry was contemplative. He reviewed the situation carefully. The comment, the public reaction, Chelsy's likely feelings, and Sam's warning. He weighed the consequences of further commentary against the potential for misinterpretation. For someone accustomed to public life, this was both familiar and unnerving. Familiar because he had handled scrutiny before, unnerving because the scrutiny was rooted in emotional nuance rather than public spectacle. Interestingly, Harry's reaction highlights a human truth. Even those who live under constant attention struggle with boundaries and personal reflection. Nostalgia is deeply human. We all revisit our pasts, consider old relationships, and wonder about what might have been. But when your past intersects with other people's lives, particularly in the high-stakes context of fame, marriage, and media attention, the emotional terrain becomes tricky to navigate. Harry's next step was crucial. He chose reflection over reaction. Instead of pushing back, making a public statement, or attempting to justify his comment, he reportedly paused. He considered the feelings of Chelsy, respected the boundaries set by Sam, and understood the potential consequences of further engagement. This moment of self-awareness marked a turning point, a subtle but significant act of respect and restraint. Yet, even with reflection, emotion was inevitable. Harry is human. He may have felt frustration, surprise, or even a touch of guilt. The reminder of a past connection can stir old feelings, regrets, and unspoken memories. And while he was not acting impulsively, those emotions existed, quietly, in the background, shaping how he thought about the situation. The private reaction also included a recognition of public perception. Harry knows that even private actions often become public narratives. He likely anticipated that anything he did next, whether words, gestures, or silence, could be interpreted, analyzed, and sensationalized. That awareness adds pressure, intensifies emotion, and forces careful decision-making. Meanwhile, Chelsy remained composed, and Sam's firm intervention provided a stabilizing influence. Harry's reflection now had context. Boundaries existed, privacy was respected, and the present was prioritized over the past. It was a moment of reckoning, a test of maturity, discretion, and understanding of human relationships. Sources suggest that Harry's next moves were thoughtful. He did not attempt to rekindle a private dialogue with Chelsy. He refrained from social media commentary. He chose to honor the boundary, a decision that, while difficult emotionally, demonstrated a deep respect for the lives of others. This restraint, however, did not mean he was unaffected. Emotionally, it was a complex mix of nostalgia, self-reflection, and awareness of responsibility. The behind-the-scenes dynamics were further complicated by the media landscape. Even private interactions have a way of leaking into public discussion, especially when they involve someone as high-profile as Prince Harry. The tension between private reflection and public scrutiny created an environment in which every decision mattered. And in this environment, emotional intelligence became as critical as strategic thinking. This chapter highlights a critical theme. Sometimes the most dramatic action happens quietly. While rumors, comments, and interventions draw headlines, the real story is often the internal navigation of emotion, reflection, and restraint. Harry's reaction behind the scenes was about managing himself, not controlling the narrative, but honoring relationships and boundaries. And yet, as calm as Harry's response may have been, the situation was far from settled. Human emotion, history, and public fascination rarely allow for simple resolutions. The quiet reflection set the stage for subsequent reactions, misinterpretations, and continued tension, all of which would play out in the next phase of the story. The key takeaway is this: even in moments of reflection, the past has power. And when boundaries are tested, even subtle warnings can trigger emotional reckoning. For Harry, the experience was both a reminder of the weight of nostalgia and the importance of respecting the lives of others. What happens when a private story, meant to stay behind closed doors, suddenly lands in the hands of the media? For Harry, Chelsy, and Sam, that moment marked a turning point. The world had begun to catch wind of the situation, and as anyone who's been in the public eye knows, once the media gets a whiff, the story takes on a life of its own. It began subtly. A social media post here, a fleeting rumor there. Initially, there was no headline screaming scandal, just whispers among online communities and forums that follow royal lives with obsessive detail. Yet these whispers quickly morphed into speculation, amplified by algorithms hungry for clicks, engagement, and controversy. And before anyone could intervene, the story had grown. The media thrives on tension. Stories about past relationships, particularly involving someone as high-profile as Prince Harry, are irresistible. Add the element of nostalgia and the suggestion of lingering feelings, and suddenly a small private reflection becomes a news cycle phenomenon. Outlets began framing Harry's words as hints of old romance, or Prince Harry's surprising admission about Chelsy Davy, drawing readers into an emotional narrative that may not have reflected reality at all. For Chelsy, the creeping media attention was a delicate test. She has spent years cultivating a life removed from public spectacle. Privacy has been her shield and her sanctuary. And yet, the persistent interest in Harry's comment threatened to breach that sanctuary. Her reaction remained calm and measured, but behind the scenes, the awareness of intrusion was undeniable. She knew that any misstep, even silence, could be interpreted in 1,000 different ways. Sam Cutmore-Scott, ever the protector, recognized the pattern instantly. Media cycles are relentless. Stories gain momentum quickly and rarely fade on their own. If left unchecked, speculation could evolve into misrepresentation, impacting Chelsy's life and reputation. So, Sam doubled down on maintaining boundaries, staying in contact with trusted sources, and reinforcing the private message he had already delivered to Harry. Calm, deliberate, and calculated, that was his approach. The media's involvement introduced a new layer of pressure for Harry as well. In private, he may have felt reflective or nostalgic, but once the story was picked up and reframed, every word, nuance, and implication became subject to public debate. Headlines were crafted for maximum engagement, often amplifying emotion and framing the narrative in dramatic, attention-grabbing ways. Suddenly, a simple memory became a story that demanded a reaction, interpretation, and explanation. Not from Harry alone, but from everyone connected to him. This chapter also highlights the modern media landscape. Stories no longer require intent or substance to go viral. The combination of speculation, curiosity, and public fascination can propel a minor comment into an international headline. For high-profile individuals, this means even thoughtful, private reflections are vulnerable to amplification, distortion, and interpretation far beyond their original context. Chelsy's position became more delicate as media narratives emerged. Even without commenting publicly, the headlines and social commentary reached her circle, her friends, and inevitably her life. Each story carried subtle implications about her marriage, her relationship with Harry, and her emotional world. While she remained composed, the emotional strain was real, an invisible tension created simply by external interpretation and public scrutiny. Harry, too, was caught in the media storm. He is no stranger to headlines, but this situation was different. Unlike tabloids reporting on events, this story was rooted in private emotion, past connections, and personal boundaries that made it more sensitive, more complex, and more difficult to navigate. Every potential response had ramifications. Every action could be misinterpreted, and every silence could be analyzed. And yet, even in the chaos, there was an underlying lesson. The power of perception often outweighs the truth. In the eyes of the public, the story became bigger than it actually was, reshaped by the media's framing and fueled by curiosity, assumptions, and emotional investment. The narrative had been hijacked by speculation, and now it was no longer solely about memory or reflection. It was about perception, narrative control, and reputation. Sam, aware of this, remained vigilant. He understood that intervention was not a one-time act. The media's persistent curiosity meant boundaries had to be reinforced privately, strategically, and without aggression. His goal was not to confront the press, but to safeguard Chelsy's life from becoming collateral damage in a story that had grown beyond anyone's control. This chapter also shows the ripple effect of media amplification. Once a story gains visibility, it reaches far beyond those directly involved. Fans debate endlessly, social media algorithms create echo chambers, and small speculations are magnified into insider information. For Harry and Chelsy, the emotional stakes became intertwined with the public's insatiable curiosity. Even minor interpretations could carry consequences that stretched across the lives of all three central figures. Despite the pressure, Chelsy and Sam's strategy remained steady. They did not react impulsively. They maintained privacy. They relied on discretion and thoughtful communication. And Harry, though affected emotionally, chose reflection over reaction. This delicate balance between action and restraint would prove crucial in the unfolding drama. The media's role in escalating a private reflection into a full-blown narrative highlights a critical reality. In a hyper-connected world, controlling the narrative is almost impossible. Even the most measured people can find themselves at the center of speculation, and even the quietest actions are subject to amplification. It begins to seep into the private world, affecting emotions, decisions, and relationships. What started as a subtle comment is now intertwined with public perception, and the tension between private boundaries and public narrative is about to reach a breaking point. What do you do when a story about your past, one you thought was long settled, suddenly becomes the center of attention? For Chelsy Davy, the answer wasn't headlines, tweets, or public statements. It was private reflection, measured decisions, and emotional composure. Chelsy's life has always been grounded in discretion. Unlike Harry, she doesn't live under constant global scrutiny. She's chosen a life where privacy and personal peace take precedence over fame or validation. And yet, the ripple effects of Harry's comment and the media frenzy couldn't be ignored. Even behind closed doors, she felt the subtle pressure, the emotional tension that comes when your past intersects unexpectedly with your present. Her initial response was calm observation. She watched the story unfold, listened to the murmurs, and carefully considered each development. She didn't act impulsively. She didn't engage publicly. Instead, she focused on understanding the situation fully, prioritizing perspective over reaction. Chelsy's private response was not passive. It was deliberate, reflective, and protective. At the heart of Chelsy's reaction was the desire to safeguard her life with Sam Cutmore-Scott. Their marriage, built on trust, communication, and shared values, was her anchor. She understood that any emotional overreaction or public engagement could escalate the situation. Therefore, her private response involved two critical strategies: internal processing and measured communication.